$1, just one. Put that bill in your hand and imagine it's 1970 in the United States. Now here's the question that grabs people by the collar. If you stepped out of your house with $1 in 1970, how much of your day could you actually buy? And why does that same $1 today feel like it disappears before you even open your wallet? Stay with this, because in a few seconds, this turns from a simple prices were lower back then story into something bigger. A reality check about how the dollar changed, how everyday life changed, and how the same country can feel like two different worlds depending on the year printed on the calendar. And yes, we're going from bread to gasoline, but we're also going to touch rent, movies, school supplies, and the little invisible things that quietly got more expensive while nobody was watching. Picture the scene. It's 1970. The United States is loud, busy, full of motion. Cars are bigger. Main streets feel like a postcard. A lot of people still pay in cash without thinking twice. You walk into a corner store, the kind with a bell on the door, and you don't need an app, a password, or a notification to buy what you need. You just reach into your pocket and count what you have. And you've got $1. Today, a single dollar often feels like a token, something you find under the car seat, something you toss in a jar. But back then, that dollar had muscle. Not because people were richer, but because prices, wages, and expectations lived on a completely different scale. And that's the heart of this whole story. It's not only what you could buy, it's what people believed was normal to buy. Here's the simple, powerful anchor that keeps this story honest. When you adjust for inflation, $1 in 1970 is roughly like more than $8 in 2026 in terms of buying power. That means the question isn't really what can $1 buy. The real question is, what can about $8 buy today? And then you compare that to the mindset of 1970. Because in 1970, $1 wasn't one item. It was a small plan. It was a mini mission. It was the kind of money that could cover a basic need and still leave you with change. And that detail matters, because change used to mean something. A pocket full of coins wasn't just noise. It was options. Now, let's go exactly where the title promised. Bread and gasoline. In 1970, grabbing basic food felt different. A quick stop for bread, maybe something simple to go with it, felt like a normal errand that didn't require mental math. The shopping basket was smaller, yes, but the dollar stretched farther inside that smaller basket. People didn't call it budgeting hacks, they just called it buying what you need. And gasoline, this is where it gets emotional for a lot of Americans. Because gas is the price you see every week, sometimes every day. It's posted in giant numbers for everyone to compare. Gasoline became one of the clearest before and after signs of the modern economy. Back then, many drivers could put a little cash down and feel like they actually moved the needle in the tank. Today, you put the same amount in and it can feel like the gauge barely nods. But here's the twist. The story isn't only that prices rose. The story is that the dollar's role changed. In 1970, a dollar could be part of the whole transaction. Today, a dollar is often just part of the tax, or part of the tip, or part of the extra fee that shows up at checkout. And that leads to the next uncomfortable truth. Inflation doesn't just raise prices, it changes behavior. It changes what people consider worth it. It changes the way families plan their week. It changes how a teenager feels holding money for the first time. It changes what a parent promises their child at the store. It changes the emotional weight of the word expensive. If you've ever heard someone older say, back then, a dollar was a dollar, they're not just being dramatic. They're describing a world where the same piece of paper carried more real-life leverage, and it's measurable. The Consumer Price Index used for these comparisons was about 38.8 in 1970 and about 324.122 in 2026, which helps show the scale of change across time. That shift adds up to a cumulative price change of roughly 735% over that period. Now, in a second, we're going to do something that makes this hit harder. We're going to walk through a day in 1970 with only $1 and feel what choices open up. Then we'll walk through a day today with $1 and feel what choices shut down. And while we do it, pay attention to one thing. The emotion isn't about nostalgia, it's about contrast. Quick question for the comments, and be honest. If someone handed you $1 right now, what would you buy without adding any of your own money? One thing, no bundles. No, I'll just put the rest on my card. What's the move? Alright, pocket the dollar. It's 1970. Let's spend it. You step out into the day with one clear goal. Get something practical. Maybe something to eat. Maybe something for the house. Maybe just enough gasoline to keep things moving. You're not trying to treat yourself. You're trying to cover a need. You walk into the store and you're not thinking about subscription fees, delivery fees, service charges, or a screen asking you to round up. You're looking at prices that, by today's standards, feel unreal, not because people were living in luxury, but because the baseline of the economy was lower, simpler, and less layered with add-ons. And here's the part that surprises a lot of people. Even the way people talked about money was different. People didn't say inflation is killing me every other conversation. They didn't refresh price trackers. They didn't watch a daily feed of economic anxiety. A dollar was small, But it wasn't meaningless. Now you leave the store. You've got your item. And you might still have change. Real change, not to pennies. Change you can use. That change could become a phone call, a snack, a quick stop, a small kindness, a newspaper, a bus ride, something that keeps your day going. And that's what another world means. It's not fantasy. It's function. It's momentum. Now hold that feeling. Because in the next part, we're going to bring the same $1 into today's United States and watch how the world reacts to it. Now snap back to the present. Same United States. Same idea. You've got $1. Not $1 plus your card. Not $1 and a coupon and points. Just $1. Here's where the story turns into a mirror. Because today, the dollar isn't just weaker. It's also surrounded by systems designed for bigger numbers. Prices are built for tens and twenties. Even when something costs a few dollars, it's rarely one single dollar, clean and complete. You can feel it in the way the cashier looks at you if you pay with cash. You can feel it in the way you search for the cheapest option and still land above what your pocket holds. If $1 in 1970 roughly matches more than $8 today in buying power, then $1 today is like a small fraction of that older dollar. That means the modern dollar often can't play the same role in a purchase. It can contribute, but it struggles to complete. And that changes something subtle. It changes dignity in everyday transactions. In 1970, a kid with $1 could walk into a store and feel like a customer. Today, a kid with $1 can walk into the same kind of store and feel like they read just short, like they're always almost there, always missing the last piece. So let's do the day walk again. But in today's world, you step out. You want something basic. Let's keep the promise. Bread and gasoline are still on the table. You approach the shelf, or the pump, or the counter, and $1 quickly becomes a question instead of an answer. What can it buy without help? Sometimes it buys a small item. Sometimes it buys part of an item. Sometimes it buys nothing in the category you wanted, and you have to switch goals. You planned bread, you settle for something smaller. You planned gasoline, you settle for not today. That constant settling is the modern reality for millions of people, and it's why inflation is not just an economic term, it's a daily mood. Now, to be fair, the world also improved in many ways. Products got safer, cars got more efficient and more complex, medicine advanced. Technology exploded. Convenience became normal. But convenience has a price tag, and sometimes the price tag is not only money. Sometimes it's the feeling that you can't participate unless you spend more. In 1970, the baseline expectation for a normal purchase was lower. Today, the baseline expectation is higher, and it pulls everything up with it. Even when a store tries to offer something cheap, the total experience can add cost. Parking, delivery, the time you lose, the fees, the tax, the tip culture, the fact that nothing is simply one price anymore. That's why people argue about the past. One person says, yeah, but wages were lower. Another says, yeah, but houses were cheaper. Another says, yeah, but you didn't have the internet. Everyone's right in their own corner. But the focus here is just the same simple object, the $1 bill, and what it can realistically do. And again, the measurable side matters. The CPI jumped from about 38.8 in 1970 to about 324.122 in 2026 signals that the overall price level rose dramatically across the period. When that kind of rise becomes normal, the currency unit at the bottom, the $1, stops being a unit of buying and becomes a unit of rounding. And when the bottom unit becomes rounding, people start feeling like everything is expensive, even when they can still technically afford it. Because the brain remembers what a dollar used to mean. Not personally, even culturally. In stories, in movies, in old receipts, in the way parents and grandparents talk. Now let's bring bread and gasoline back in, but from a different angle. Bread is not just bread. Bread is a symbol of the basics. It's the first thing people mention when they want to describe simple living. Gasoline is not just gasoline, it's mobility, it's work, it's the ability to say yes to opportunities. So when the dollar weakens, it doesn't only change the pantry, it changes the map of your life. When gas gets expensive, a job that's only 10 miles away becomes expensive. A cheaper apartment far from work becomes not so cheap. Visiting family becomes a calculation. Taking kids to activities becomes a negotiation. Suddenly, the economy is not a headline, it's your schedule. And when basic food prices rise, people don't just buy less bread, they buy different bread. They change brands, they change routines, they skip the extra, they start calling normal things treats. That emotional shift is the quiet part nobody measures on a chart. So if $1 in 1970 was another world, it's because the world allowed the smallest bill to still feel like a tool. Today, the world often treats the smallest bill like a leftover. Now here's the part that most people don't expect. This isn't just a sad story. It's also a story about awareness. Because once you understand what happened to $1, you understand why saving feels harder, why prices feel jumpy, why older generations talk differently about money, and why younger generations sometimes feel like they're running on a treadmill. Another quick question for the comments. When you think of a fair price, do you compare it to last year, or do you compare it to a memory from childhood? Which one hits harder? Next, we're going to time travel one more time, but not to buy things. We're going to compare mindsets. What did people in 1970 expect from money, and what do people expect now? Because the biggest change might not be bread or gasoline. It might be confidence. If you want to understand why $1 in 1970 feels like a legend, you have to look at what people expected money to do. In 1970, a lot of everyday life ran on simpler math. Not easy life. Not perfect life. Just simpler math. Many purchases felt like they belonged in the small money category. You didn't need a big bill for every errand. You didn't feel like every door opened only after you swiped a card. That simplicity created a kind of confidence. If you had a few dollars, you felt prepared. If you had $10, you felt comfortable. If you had 20, you felt like you could handle surprises. The ladder of money had more rungs that mattered. Today, the ladder has gaps. $1 often doesn't matter. $5 matters a bit. $10 matters, but it can vanish quickly. $20 can still disappear faster than people expect. The rungs got farther apart, and that changes how people talk, how they plan, and how they hope. Think about a teenager in 1970 earning a little money. That teenager could realistically hold a small amount and feel independent in a practical way. The money meant action. Go here, buy that, do this, handle it yourself. Now think about a teenager today. They might hold more money than that teenager did back then, but the feeling of independence can actually be weaker, because the world requires more to participate. You can have cash and still feel stuck if the baseline costs are high. This is where the inflation adjustment becomes more than a statistic. If the buying power ratio is roughly 81 from 1970 to 2026, then a small amount back then maps to a bigger number today. So when older people remember $5 doing a lot, that memory doesn't translate to $5 today. It translates to something like $40 and feel, depending on what you're talking about. And that's why so many conversations about money sound like arguments when they actually translation problems. People are speaking different economic languages. Now, let's tie that back to bread and gasoline one more time, but through the lens of trust. Bread is trust that the basics are within reach. Gasoline is trust that movement is possible. When those basics feel unstable, people start feeling like everything is unstable. That's why inflation hurts even when it's not dramatic week to week. It's the slow drip that erodes trust. But the United States has always been a country of adaptation. People adjust. Businesses adjust. Families adjust. And the dollar itself didn't just weaken, life got more complex. Standards changed. Services grew. Choices exploded. Convenience became a product. Back then, you had fewer subscriptions, fewer monthly auto charges, fewer micropayments draining your account quietly. Today, you can lose $10 without buying a single physical thing, just from small recurring costs. That wasn't common in 1970, so the modern dollar has to fight more enemies. It's not only higher prices, it's more categories of spending. More ways to spend without noticing. That's why some people feel broke even when they re-earning more than anyone in their family earned decades ago. Because the modern economic environment has more friction. And still, the math remains. The general price level rose massively over time. And that turns a $1 bill from a purchase into a fragment. A cumulative change around 735% across the period is the kind of shift that reshapes daily life. Now, to keep this grounded and useful here, a mental trick that makes the whole story click without needing a calculator every time. When you hear a 1970 price, multiply it by around 8 to imagine it's rough today. Feel it's not perfect for every item, but it's close enough to understand why everything sounds cheap in old stories. So if someone says, I could do that for $1, what they're often saying is, I could do that for something like $8 in today's feel. And when you frame it like that, the past stops sounding like a fairy tale. It starts sounding like a different baseline. Now let's build toward the final punch of this video, because it's not going to be things got worse. It's going to be the dollar changed, the world changed, and your choices changed. And once you see how choices changed, you can stop feeling confused and start feeling informed. In the next part, we're going to bring it all together with one simple question. If $1 was another world in 1970, what is the modern equivalent of that feeling today? And what does that say about the future? So what's the modern version of $1 in 1970? If the buying power shift is roughly 8 to 1 from 1970 to 2026, then the feeling of $1 that can actually do something may live closer to a bill, like $10 today, depending on what you're trying to buy and where you live. Not because 10 is magical, but because it's closer to the old small bill, with real options experience that people remember. And that's the point of this whole story. Another world isn't only about lower numbers on price tags. It's about the role money played in everyday confidence. In 1970 America, you could step out with a small amount and feel like you could handle basic life. Bread, a simple errand, a small tank top off, a newspaper, a quick bite, not luxury, just momentum. Today, you can step out with $1 and feel like you're missing the minimum entry fee to normal life. And when that becomes common, people start carrying more anxiety because the margin for error gets thinner. One small surprise, one small fee, one small price jump, and the plan breaks. Now, this video isn't here to make anyone hopeless. It's here to make the timeline clear. When you understand that $1 in 1970 had the buying power of more than $8 today, you stop comparing the past to the present using the same numbers. You start comparing using the same meaning. And once you compare meaning, you can have smarter conversations in your family. You can explain to a younger person why older folks talk the way they do. You can explain to an older person why younger folks feel squeezed even when they working hard. You can stop turning it into blame and start turning it into context. Because the truth is, every generation gets a different version of America. Different costs, different tools, different risks, different opportunities. And everybody is trying to build a life with whatever version they got handed. So here's the last image to leave you with. Imagine two pockets. One pocket is 1970. It has $1. That pocket feels like I can do something today. The other pocket is today. It has $1. That pocket feels like I need more before I start. Same country, same paper, different world. If you want, this can become a series. Next video could be one paycheck in 1970 versus one paycheck today, or rent then and now, or what a full grocery bag meant across decades. Just say the word. Final question for the comments. In this one, S personal. What's the first thing you remember buying with your own money, and how much did it cost? And if you're younger, what do you wish $1 could still buy today? If you enjoyed this kind of time travel reality check, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who always says, "Back in my day," because this will spark a real conversation.